This lecture series grew out of the Toner Awards, which we do every year. Every day would be too much.
Who do we have come out?
in honor of Robin Toner, who was a national correspondent for the New York Times. She died 9 years ago. She was an alumna of the Newhouse School, and when she died in 2008, her family endowed the Toner Prize, which we give every year to a political journalist. And the idea was to try to inspire students, and particularly students here at Newhouse, to think about political reporting as a career. And so every year we give a prize. We have a contest. Great political journalists submit their work. We pick somebody. We have a event down in Washington, D.C., and then we bring them back to campus in the fall to talk to students about their work and about the job of being a political journalist. So this year, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the Newhouse School David Allen Fahrenthold, who is a reporter, political reporter for the Washington Post. He also contributes to CNN. And if you haven't seen his work, you probably have heard about his work, because he was responsible for two really important stories during the 2016 political campaign. One of those stories involved political contributions made by Donald Trump's foundation, and David did the legwork of finding out about those contributions and basically found out there wasn't very much to them. And in fact, that the foundation really didn't do much charitable giving. But probably the story that got him the most attention was a story he did about the Access Hollywood tapes. He was the one who broke that story that became one of the defining moments of that campaign, and that horrified many people when they watched that presidential candidate on tape talking about how he interacted with women that he met for the first time, and how easy it was to do things to them and have them not complain. It was an amazing story. People were horrified, and that was some of David's work. So it's really great to have him here today. Just a little bit more about him. He's been working for the Post now for, what is it, David, 5 years?
17 years.
Pretty amazing, because he's only like 23 years old.
I know. He started early. He's a graduate of Harvard University. He wrote for the Harvard Crimson. He graduated with honors in 2000. So without further ado, tonight we'll have David talk a bit with Joel Kaplan, Professor Joel Kaplan, who himself at one time was a political reporter. And he will share with you some of Joel will have a conversation with him, and then he will open it up for questions later. If you're tweeting about this, you'll see our hashtag Journalism Matters. I hope you will tweet also hashtag Toner Lecture. So we're hoping that you all will light things up on social media, and that people will have an opportunity to follow us to see and take part in the conversation. David, and I hope he'll mention a little bit about this, he talked about the fact that Twitter has been responsible for helping him on many stories, and that he gets ideas, that people follow him but also share information with him, and that he also, a lot of his news now, like I'm sure many of you get their news from Twitter. So it'll be interesting. Hopefully you'll talk a little bit about that. So David Fahrenthold, Joel Kaplan, thank you all for being here tonight.
I'm so looking forward to this. I understand Billy Bush is in the audience, so he might have a question for you later.
Unfortunately, he doesn't have very much to do now. So.
I'm also told that you speak really fast, so that's great, because I can get twice as many questions in there.
Okay.
But I want to start, you're from Houston, so Hurricane Harvey, I assume you still have family members there. Did it hit close, or what happened?
A lot of my relatives have actually moved to D.C. I don't have a lot of relatives there now, but I have a lot of friends who did incredible things, saved people from in their boats. One of my friends was a doctor at Texas Children's and coordinated this rescue of all these children with dialysis, bringing them to the hospital. So people did some amazing things and had a lot of damage. But
And where you grew up, though, was that affected?
But yeah, when people, I think, never knew there was in Houston, those of you who haven't been to Houston, you really try to avoid any contact with the outdoors as much as you can. There was a Buffalo Bayou ran through my neighborhood. I don't think anybody knew that because you would never voluntarily go outside to go look at the water. It's too hot, there's too many mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people did flood out in that neighborhood.
Any desire for you, once you heard about that, to fly down there and cover the hurricane?
Yes, a little bit. They actually tried to get me to go, but like 4 hours before the hurricane hit, and I was not about to fly into the middle of a hurricane. So I did a lot of rewrite stuff from the Post, but didn't go down there. The people that we sent down there, actually, the people that did the best are people who'd been like war correspondents, people who'd lived without water and food for a long time, people who were used to working in some very rough circumstances. Those are the people who were sort of, for us, who did the most good at Harvey.
All right, so let's start getting to the good stuff. But first, I want you to maybe talk a little bit about your career path. You kind of did the old school career path, went to an Ivy League school, no journalism, did it while you worked, unlike Eli Saslow, a great Washington Post reporter who won the Pulitzer Prize, who came through the Newhouse School. But in the old days, many people went your route. Nowadays, it's not quite as common. So tell us, did you always want to be a journalist and how you got to the Post right out of college, looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky. I got into the Post at the sort of end of the print boom. It was so long ago we were making all this money off the print newspaper. Yep. We were hiring people like crazy. We were like, we have so much money, we were doing stupid things. Like, we're going to challenge the Baltimore Sun in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. We're going to send people out to these like horse country suburbs where nobody even thinks of themselves as Washingtonians. We were wasting money and wasting it on interns. So they hired almost my entire intern class that year. And I really, timing just worked great for me because I came in the middle of a boom. And then I stayed through some really lean years, 2007 to 2013, where people were taking buyouts. We were struggling with the business model, and so basically, when I started, I looked ahead at this really long hierarchy of people above me, and then most of them got bought out. They were too expensive. They'd been there too long, and so all of a sudden, sort of all these people left, and I was sort of too young and cheap to get rid of. So I've been able to I sort of had the good fortune of coming in right behind that wave, and I stayed long enough to have Jeff Bezos buy us and sort of be part of this new renaissance of the Post, which I never thought was going to happen.
Well, did you go in knowing that one of your goals was to be a political reporter?
No. In fact, I thought that was the last thing I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be a national correspondent. We used to have these people who were like somebody in LA, somebody in Austin, somebody in Seattle. And you could roam the country and write about whatever was happening in your region of the world. And I got to do that for 1 year in Boston. I was the New England regional correspondent, which was an amazing job. Just did the most fun, interesting stories. But then we ran out of money. All those jobs got canceled. And so there was a time at the Post when if you wanted to move up, the one thing we did that was the top of the heap was politics. There was, we'd cut back on all of our other ambitions, but we still did politics. And so politics is where you wanted to be, so that's where I ended up. And it's been fun. I would not like to do it forever. I'd like to do something else eventually.
But even with the Bezos money, they still don't have foreign correspondents anymore or national correspondents.
We have foreign correspondents, but not as many as we used to. We have national, we're sort of starting to put people in places. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot more sense than having them work in Washington and cover other places. But things like that we didn't used to have money for before. So a few weeks ago, I did this story about a fake Time magazine cover of Trump that he hung up. It was like the fakest looking thing I've ever seen. He hung up in his golf clubs. It showed himself. But all of you, those of your journalism school students, Time magazine never writes a cover that's like, this guy is doing great. And the subhead is like, he really is. Like, that never happens. But he had hung this cover on the wall of himself on the wall of his golf club. And one of the golf clubs, I got in and saw it and took a picture of it. And I said, well, where else is it? Well, just the new world we have freelancers all over the world. So like, I want to find out if it's hanging on the wall of his golf course in County Clare, Ireland. I can call up somebody in Dublin and they go over there the next day. I mean, so the reason we don't have national correspondents in the way we used to, but the reach we have of sort of stringers and freelancers is amazing, and that's a really new thing. All
right, so now let's move ahead. How did you end up getting on the Trump story? When did you end up getting on it, and how did it come about?
Well, so I covered the 2016 election for since the end of 2014. I started on the 2016 election so long ago that the first story I wrote was about Republican frontrunner Chris Christie. And I actually traveled around New Jersey to find all these people that Chris Christie had yelled at. That was the first story. And so, but I wanted to do, in 2016, this is really 2015.
Yeah.
I wanted to do stories about candidates, where you could really get to meet them up close. I didn't want to cover somebody who was surrounded by a big crowd of reporters where you just had to go to rallies. I wanted to see people, candidates you could really meet. And it meant that I basically covered losers, like long shots and losers. So I covered like Bobby Jindal, wrote a long profile of Bobby Jindal, and Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee, Rick Perry.
This sounds like a Jeopardy category.
Yeah. Like these are people that you forgot ever ran. And another piece of advice for journalists, if you're ever thinking about profiling somebody, as I was with Bobby Jindal, and you look up in the polling numbers to see what that person's polling numbers are, and it's actually not even a number, it's like an asterisk or an N/A. Just don't write that story. That person, you shouldn't write. So I profiled Bobby Jindal and never went anywhere. So, but all of them dropped out, basically. I really enjoyed being that close to those people, getting to see their campaigns up close, but they had all dropped out, even by the time that we got to the Iowa caucuses. And so the day of the Iowa caucuses, all my candidates were kaput, and they said, okay, well, go to Iowa. The caucuses are at night. So caucus day, there's campaigning during the day. It's not like a regular election day, and then they go caucus in the evening. So they said, go follow Trump around for his last campaign events, because it seemed like Trump, this guy who'd been married 3 times, he'd been on the cover of Playboy twice, he was going to win this state that was so socially conservative. The state of Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, the Christian conservatives, were going to vote Trump. It wasn't that crazy.
Ted Cruz.
Yeah, in the end, Ted Cruz won barely. But so I followed Trump around for that day, and I saw him do this weird thing in the town of Waterloo, Iowa, where he stopped his rally and he called a charity up on stage, a local veterans charity from Waterloo, and he gave them this giant check, like a golf tournament-sized check, so you could see it all the way in the back, for $100,000 from the Trump Foundation. And they said, oh, thank you so much. We're going to use this for such good works. They sat down, the rally restarted. That's unusual. I'd never seen that before, because probably that kind of thing is illegal. You can't use a charity to boost a presidential campaign. And it got me interested in, where was that money coming from? Where did it go? Where was the rest of it? It turned out that Trump had raised $6 million for veterans at this telethon sort of thing he had a few days earlier while he was skipping a Fox News debate. And so I thought, okay, well, so I watched all the video of his other rallies.
Let me ask you, so prior to that, you had never written a story about charities?
No, never.
So basically you were going in here, like journalists do all the time, with an idea, but blind to how things work.
Completely blind. And I thought that, so I was like, well, okay, he said he raised $6 million for veterans. I saw him give away $100,000. Where's the rest? And so I watched all his previous rallies where he'd given checks away, and I could get like $1 million out of watching those. But then he stopped. And that's like $4.9 million unaccounted for. And I like that story because it was so concrete, right? So much about Trump is like, I feel like so much of covering Trump was like sort of norms and trying to pin him down and make him ashamed of the things that he'd done that were shameful, or trying to pin him down in a flip-flop or a lie. And it was so sort of slippery and unsatisfying. And I like this because there were numbers. There was a concrete thing you could write about. That money existed, and it went to somebody, and I could figure out where it went. And so but I didn't think it was like a 9-month story. I thought it was a 2-day story. So I called the Trump campaign and said, okay, he raised $6 million. I know where 1.1 million of it went. Where's the rest? Thinking they would get back to me in like 2 days, and then I'd write that story and go on to something else. But they didn't get back to me because they hadn't given the money away, and that was the beginning of something that sort of slowly built into this kind of year-long project.
All right, so you really know nothing about how charities work or operate, except some vague notion that you probably gave to like United Way at the Washington Post.
Not even that.
Yeah. And so how did you educate yourself in this?
This was a really interesting reporting assignment because I really knew so little, and it's a complicated world. And so I started by getting all the documents that I could. Thankfully, if you cover charities, the IRS requires charities to produce something called the IRS Form 990 that lists, actually a lot, lists the incoming money, the balance they have, the money they give out. So I got that.
And not just charities, right? All not-for-profits. So Syracuse University has to file a 990 as well.
Exactly. So the Trump Foundation had produced these 990s, and I could get some documents, some information out of that. And I would call, I tried finding like former IRS people who were at law firms to explain things to me. It took me a while to find, one of the challenges of this story, I used to cover the environment, and one of the ways this story was like that was that it was hard to find people who knew the subject well enough to be experts, but could pull themselves out of it and explain it to a layperson, right? So I spent a lot of time talking to people who could understand it, but you couldn't quote them because it was not really any more clear to a layperson what they
They're
were
giving
talking
you a roadmap, though.
to know what other documents to pull, what other things to look for. So the more I started doing that, the more I started finding things that the Trump Foundation had done that looked possibly illegal. It looked like they might have been against the law. And the more I started trying to figure out where Trump had promised to give money to people and he hadn't given it at all. But yeah, for me, so much of this was learning what's legal, what's normal, what's expected, what's an honor system between sort of legal and normal. And that took a while.
Were there other people in the newsroom who you could go to who could help you with this, or no?
No. I mean, we had a philanthropy reporter a while back, but we don't anymore. So it was really sort of stumbling around in the dark. And this was a really interesting experience for me because there were a lot of times when I would find something today, find out a fact today, even report it today, and then 3 weeks from now, I'd find some source or some expert, and I realized, well, that thing that I wrote about 3 weeks ago, that was illegal. That was a really big deal that I knew about it. So it's sort of, a lot of times my analysis hadn't caught up with the facts the facts hadn't caught up with the analysis.
So basically, when you, from the eve of the Iowa caucuses through the election, almost all your stories had to do with his charitable contributions.
Well, there were sort of two phases. In the beginning, the editors didn't really think this was a big deal, and so they had me doing a bunch of other stories. After Iowa, I was trying to figure out what had happened specifically to the $6 million you promised to veterans. I was calling, not getting answers, trying everything I could to try to figure out where the $6 million had gone because the Trump campaign was stonewalling me. During that time, they were not that interested in it, so they had me doing other stories about Ted Cruz and Rubio and Clinton and other people. But then we had this thing where in late May, one of the questions I was trying to answer was, of the $6 million, Trump said $1 million would come out of his own pocket. So $5 million came from other people, $1 million came from him. And I couldn't find any evidence that anybody had gotten any of the $1 million that was his. You think that would be the easiest for him to give away? It just comes right out of his pocket. I couldn't find any evidence anybody had gotten it. And Corey Lewandowski, who was Trump's campaign manager then, called me and he said, actually, look, I can tell you now, this is like the end of May, when the reporting had started in February. I can tell you that Donald Trump has given away all $1 million that was coming out of his pocket, but I can't tell you who got it, or what amounts, or when, or anything else. It's all secret. But you should know for sure that he gave away his $1 million.
Trust me.
Trust me.
Yes.
Right. And Corey Lewandowski has not earned that level of trust. I mean, no one has, right? But especially not him. So then I said, okay, well, how am I going to check this, right? I can't call every charity in America. I can't even call every veterans charity in America. There's too many of them. So I'm going to try to prove a positive. I'm going to try to use Twitter to find somebody who will come forward and say, yeah, I got $100,000 from Donald Trump. I got some of that $1 million. So I spent a day searching for anybody who would say, yes, I got some of that money, and trying like veterans advocates, veterans magazines, veterans groups, veterans, celebrities who have do a lot of work with veterans. Anybody I could who would sort of amplify this search. Look, I'm looking for this money. I'm going to prove Donald Trump right. And every query I always included, at real Donald Trump, because we know Trump searches Twitter for his own name. So I thought he'd find it. And then, he's the only one who really knows. So I thought he would sort of fess up and tell me what he'd done. And so I spent a day searching on Twitter and hadn't found anything. Everybody that got back to me said no, they'd never heard of this money, they'd never gotten any money. At the end of the day, I felt like I'd just wasted a day. I felt like the oldest person in the world. Like I tried this stupid social media thing and it was just a total bust. That night, after my public search, Donald Trump actually gave $1 million away. So when Lewandowski told me he'd given $1 million, it was still in his pocket. He only gave it away after I had made this public search for it.
And then didn't he call you a loser?
The nasty guy.
Nasty guy. Yeah.
The next night, the last time I talked to him, Trump called me like late May and said, okay, I've given $1 million away to this group, and they called the Marine Corps Law Enforcement Foundation. And I said, well, you promised this money 4 months ago. Why didn't you give it away now? Why did you wait 4 months and give it away now? And he said, well, I had to vet the group that I was giving it to. And it turned out, I just knew from other reporting that this veterans group, they had given him like a Lifetime Achievement Award, a Man of the Year award the year before in this big gala at the Waldorf Astoria.
Made the cover of Time, probably.
Right, exactly. It was TV guy at that time. So they had given him like a whole gala in his honor. And I was like, after that, you had to vet them? It took you 4 months to vet them after they gave you this big award? And he said, oh yeah, that's true. And I said, well, would you not have given this money away if it hadn't been for me searching for it? And that's when he called me a nasty guy. That was the last time I talked to him. And maybe that was why. I sort of forget why. But the upshot was that it was all secret.
All right, I have a couple of bigger picture questions, but the first question is, now that you've kind of stepped back, which story that you did from the caucuses to election are you most proud of, and why?
That's a really interesting question. To me, it's not the Access Hollywood story. That was great, but that sort of fell in our lap. And the actual reporting of that is not that hard. The thing, some of the stories we wrote this story right before the election that sort of summed up everything we knew about his charitable giving. And it began with this incredible scene that a random reader had emailed me about. 1995, so just thinking about the way that Trump had constructed this facade of being generous, like being a generous sort of playboy, and then the difference between that facade and the reality. So, in 1995, there's this orphanage that's opening on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and they're having like a ribbon cutting, big ceremony. The TV cameras are there. Trump has never given these people a dime, but they've saved seats up on the dais, like in front of everybody for their big donors, which like Frank and Kathy Lee Gifford were there, Mayor Dinkins, Mayor Giuliani were there, like a priest was there, and then they had saved a seat for this guy who was a real estate investor who'd given a lot of money to open this orphanage. As the time is getting closer for this event, Trump, who again has never had any contact with this organization, has never given them any money, shows up and steals the guy's seat on stage, sits on stage in this seat reserved for this big donor. And everyone's like, what do we do? Donald Trump is here. And then it starts. And so Donald Trump sings this little Light of Mine with all the orphans, and he does the Macarena with the orphans. The whole thing. He goes to this whole ceremony where he's, by association being honored as like a donor to this group. And everyone who's like works for the group is like, well, that's weird. They're real donors now in the audience. He's really pissed off that his seat's been stolen. And also they're like, well, I mean, nobody would come to this thing and then not give a donation afterward. Like maybe Donald Trump's going to surprise us at the end with a $10 million check. When it ends, he leaves and never says anything to anybody ever again about that event.
Not even $7.
Yeah, not even $7,
Yeah.
nothing. So like to find out that, and like all the other things we documented about how he used the charity to buy paintings of himself, use it to pay off his business's debts. I felt like we had really done this great. We'd written this like Friday or like a Friday of like before Halloween, so close to the election. We've done all this great. We've really given you a portrait of this guy who wanted to create he knew that part of being rich and sort of a playboy in America was being generous. And he wanted to play that role, but he wanted to do as little as possible to actually live up to the substance of that sort of charitable reputation, to actually give of himself. I was really proud of that story. I thought we really summed things up. And like the day before it came out, the Jim Comey letter happened, and but many people paid attention.
Yeah.
But I thought by the end we'd taken this part of Trump's life that he'd spent so much time trying to construct a facade and hide the reality, and showed you the reality. And I was really proud of that.
So that was my favorite story as well, but let's talk a little bit about the timing of that story. It happened a week before the election, or the weekend before the week before the election. Was there an urgency saying we have to get the story in before the election, and was there a talk about, might this not influence the election?
We definitely wanted to get it in before the election, but I didn't think that in terms of like would it unfairly bias people toward Trump, I felt like it was summarizing something that we've been telling you about in bits and pieces all throughout the year. So newsrooms are always reluctant to like drop a really big story about one candidate 2 days before the election. But this is not me telling you something new about Trump. It's telling you something that summarizing something that you should have already known.
So here's my big question for you then. So you've spent 14 months writing story after story that would devastate a conventional candidate, culminating, in that story, but also in the Access Hollywood story, which you would think that you did so much. On election night, what did you think?
On election night, my job was, there were two of us, me and a reporter named Taya Gold. Our job was to write the web lead-all for this story, so like the main web story for the website that would carry all the results of the night. So in the beginning of the night, it was like polls are closing, here are the early returns. But we knew at some point in the night, our story was going to be the one that said Clinton wins or Trump wins. And so you can't just write, you can't have the wait to write that story when the race is called. You have to pre-write it. So we split it up that afternoon. She had taken the Clinton wins version, and I took the Trump wins version. And so I wrote this long story about Donald Trump winning the election. And I had done it for Romney the last time around. I really like my Romney story.
It's at Mar-a-Lago right now.
Right, exactly, yeah. This time I was really struggling with it because, like, how, I was struggling just to explain, I thought, in a hypothetical sense, how shocking it would be for Donald Trump to win the election. You know, first president who's never served in government or the military, for, you know, all the things he'd done in his life. Just how to communicate how stunning and surprising it would be. Again, thinking like, well, I'm writing about a world that will never exist. I'll show my kids this in 20 years and be like, can you believe it? I wrote a story saying Donald Trump is going to be president of the United States. And then, you know, as the night goes on, you know, we're watching all these states, you know, where, everybody who was on Twitter that night remembers, people would be like, well, don't count Florida out, Broward County's still out. You know, don't count North Carolina out, Charlotte's still out. And then, you know, Clinton never came back. It was never enough in those places. And so, like, at 2:30 in the morning, we post this story that I had written in the afternoon saying Trump had won. And, like, immediately, I got a troll email, like, you lost, Trump won. But some guy who was waiting, it's like 2:30 in the morning. and I wrote the guy back then being like, don't feel sorry for me, man. Like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to journalism, right? You know, if you like Donald Trump, your job is to go out and help him, you know, to help him succeed. It's going to be hard. But don't feel bad for me, because Trump is like a full employment act for journalists.
Yeah.
But it was just so, I've never been part of an event, you know, where the outcome was so surprising, and like where you felt like history was changing. You know, a view of, you know, you had a vision of a history, what the future was, and instant, you know, in a matter of a couple of hours, the future totally changed.
Well, I think almost everyone in this room kind of felt that way, so it's good to know that you also felt that way. But the perspective of, you know, you have your life to kind of expose, and obviously no one listened to you.
Not that no one, that is harsh.
The majority, the popular, the 3 million illegals who voted, minus them.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really, I didn't really think about it that way. I mean, it was such a complicated race that there's so many things going on both sides. Like, even the Access Hollywood tape, I didn't think of myself as like, man, I have changed the election. I thought like it affected somebody someplace, but I didn't think like, okay, I've won the election or I've lost the election. But it was, so no, I never had that feeling where like, oh man, I thought I made a difference and I didn't make a difference. Like, in a political campaign, you're going to give people information, and I felt like, if I felt like I had not succeeded in uncovering who Donald Trump was, if I felt like I had not told you, reader, who Donald Trump was, and given you evidence of, like, in easy to understand terms, what his character was like, then I would feel bad. Like, maybe I could have just done something else, people would have seen it more. I feel like I did it, you know, and people can do with that what they want.
So your role and the role of all journalists is to inform the public. What they do with that information is up to them.
Yeah, and this is the classic example of it, right? That's the only job you can hope to have. So let people be, when they go into the voting booth, they're educated on who they're voting for. Like, that's all I can do.
So let me just get back to the foundation, because as someone who's kind of written stories in that vein a little bit. I mean, basically what you've reported over that year was a massive example of self-dealing, and that he would go and he would maybe give a speech for $100,000, like you're giving today. And
Rates are much higher.
yeah. And instead of taking the check for $100,000, he would say, no, give it to my foundation. So really, he wasn't paying the foundation, but he was earning the money. But it served two purposes. One is he didn't have to pay taxes on it. And secondly, he was then using the foundation as kind of his personal piggy bank so that he could then buy portraits, pay legal fees. So he's really skirting the laws that the rest of us all have to do.
Right.
How is that, A, not illegal, and B, how was he never caught prior to this, and why are there no consequences for those things?
Well, it is illegal. I mean, I guess that's the first thing to say. It's totally illegal to,
Yeah.
to use your foundation to buy portraits of yourself or to, to pay off your business's debts. That's against the law. The thing that I was surprised by was that the IRS, everybody's afraid of the IRS, right? Everybody who's involved in a foundation is terrified of the IRS. My wife's family has a small family foundation. They follow the letter of the law, right? They have lawyers, they have annual meetings, they it's like her and her father and her sister, and they go by the Robert's Rules of Order. As if the IRS could ever care.
Yeah,
They're doing it the right way because it's an honor system, and they're afraid of the IRS, and also they just follow it because it's an honor system. But it really is mostly an honor system. The IRS for small foundations like the Trump Foundation was, they spot check none of them basically. And so there's a box on the form that says like, I wrote the law this year. And if you check the I wrote the law box, then they might come after you. But if you don't, the actual effort they make to determine if you wrote the law, like a lot of the things that they were doing that were illegal, it wasn't hard, I figured it out, but you needed to make a couple of phone calls. And they never did. The IRS just doesn't have the capacity to do that. That was one of the most surprising things for me at the beginning of this, when I talked about how Trump had used his foundation kind of as a prop of his campaign rallies. I was like, oh man, I looked up the letter of the law says no charitable foundation, no tax exempt foundation can participate in any way in a presidential, in a political campaign. I was like, oh man, I got it, And I called the IRS, and some guy who used to be an IRS auditor who's now in private practice, and he was like, well, it was like a parody bureaucracy. He's like, well, first they'll open a case, and then they'll assign it to a guy, then they'll wait a year, and then maybe they'll write a letter. It was like any consequence that was going to happen like 2 years from now, because the IRS sees themselves as a revenue collecting agency and not a law enforcement agency, and so if there's not much money in going after you, they're not going to go after you. And if they do, it's going to happen really, really slow. So that surprised me, and I think Trump has always excelled in his life in finding places, we're seeing it now in the presidency, where important rules are enforced by an honor system. Why are the norms of the presidency are largely not codified in law, they're tradition. Same thing with charity, right? The norm is that if you have a foundation that has your name on it, Joel Kaplan Foundation, people assume that the money that comes out of it is your money, because that's how everybody does it. But there's no laws that you have to do that. And so Trump liked to exploit things like that, where he used the expectations of good behavior, that he could behave badly, and nobody would check because they just assumed everybody did it the same way. And the IRS, which was supposed to be the actual legal check in this case, just didn't function.
But once you started exposing this, and you exposed a lot of it pretty early on, it was pretty clear that this was illegal. So why?
It happened slowly. So the New York Attorney General is investigating him. That also is an extremely slow process. And we got the Trump people to pay a fine because he had given this.
But that was a blatant one down in a political candidate.
He'd given you're not supposed to use your campaign to give political contributions, but he'd given this $25,000 contribution to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of Florida, at the same time she was considering whether to sue Trump University, which, the gift came out of the Trump Foundation. That's patently illegal. So we made them pay a fine and admit to it. And in their most recent tax filing, they did check the box and said, I did something illegal. But the consequences are slow and not very overwhelming so far.
All right, so I'm going to ask you maybe to surmise, and maybe you can't do it, but obviously he refused to give out his taxes. And everyone's, well, it's because he didn't give any money to charity, although you kind of proved that, so I'm not sure that would be the reason he wouldn't do it, because, and then, because there's Russian money in tax, although that might not show up either. Do you have any idea?
No clue. I mean, I've heard all kinds of theories about what it might be, what causes him to not want to release his tax returns, but I don't know. You mentioned about would he not release them to conceal the fact that he doesn't give money to charity? I don't think that's why he's not releasing them, but to me, there was a really interesting insight into his character. That people say Trump is shameless, right? He's shameless. But he's not shameless. If he had said, when I first started this reporting, in April or May, if Trump had come out and said, look, I know I said I gave all this money to charity. I didn't. I show up at charitable events, that makes the crowds bigger. I give away free rounds of golf in my golf clubs. That's my charity. Okay, yes, that would have killed Mitt Romney or John McCain or anybody else. But how many other things did Trump do that voters forgave him? If he just said, look, I don't give money to charity, people would have forgiven him in a day, and then my line of reporting would be over. But but for some reason he was unwilling to admit that he just didn't give money to charity. This was something that was too important to his character to actually fess up to and just move on from. I thought it was really interesting, and I don't know what it is about him that he can't give that part of it up. Maybe it has to do with wealth. Maybe it's an implied sort of thing. He doesn't have as much money as he says he does. If he's not giving as much money away.
Well, because obviously he wants everyone to know that he's worth $10 billion. And there was a book written that showed that he wasn't, and he sued them.
Yes,
Right. So during that year that you were reporting on this, was there a story that one of your competitors wrote or broadcast that you were jealous of?
About this, well, that's what I was jealous of last year. About this, no, I don't really think so. I mean, I think I got a head start on everybody. So there were stories people did that were good, but there was nothing where I was like, damn, I wish I would have been that. This year, the Forbes has done some reporting on the Eric Trump Foundation, which I didn't look that much at. That I thought has been really interesting. But last year, no.
Do you think that you're now pigeonholed as a charity reporter?
No, in fact. Sadly, the demand for charity reporting, even though I think charity reporting is fascinating, there's not that much demand for it. So now I write about Trump organizations, Mar-a-Lago, golf courses, and everything. So that's been fun. It involves charities, because a lot of charities who host like big galas at Mar-a-Lago or golf tournaments, those are big clients of his, and so it's been helpful to know about the way charities work and the kinds of documents that are available. But I don't think they want me to be a charity reporter. I feel like I'm being pigeonholed as a Trump like deception reporter, not a charity.
And just one quick question, we're going to go to the audience. So Robert Mueller, obviously the special counsel, is looking at the Russian connection, but he has a broad portfolio. You think he'll get into any of this?
I don't think so, just because the New York Attorney General, he's working with Mueller and the New York Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, are sort of working together on some of this stuff. And Schneiderman has an ongoing investigation into the Trump Foundation. It's possible that those will intersect, but I think the possible penalties for charity fraud, or charity rules violations, I guess more properly said, are still so low that I just don't see those being linked. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think even if Schneiderman, the New York AG, concluded that Trump had done all the things that I reported he did, broken all the laws that I reported he probably broke, I don't think the penalties would be that great. I don't know, could be wrong.
And the New York Attorney General, can he prosecute him criminally or only civilly for these things?
In theory, he could prosecute him criminally.
He could.
In practice, that is not going to happen, but in theory, he could.
Yeah. And just one quick question, then we'll go. So what are your future plans? What would you like to cover in the future?
If this like Trump moment ever ends,
Well, we'll end with impeachment, right?
I don't know about that. I think that I'd love to go back to writing about the thing that I've done at the Post that I love the most, the job that I really enjoy the most. Well, I felt like covering New England, but I love covering government bureaucracy. I did that for a couple of years, where I took these stories of like starting with like an incredibly stupid thing the government did, and then like tracing it back to the original good intention that launched the stupid thing, like the National Raisin Reserve, or like I did a story about like, the government making magicians who pull rabbits out of hats, like making them file disaster plans for their rabbits, and how they would save the rabbit from the nuclear attack.
Very important.
I just love those stories, because I really like sort of seeing how good intentions go wrong. That's what I thought, if Clinton had won, that's what I would have gone back to doing, and so maybe I'll get to that eventually again.
So I lied, one more question. Any reaction to you or people in the newsroom about Trump calling you the enemy of the people, and also really going after Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of the Post? What kind of reaction to that?
Well, on the one hand, it's not good, right? I wish that President Trump calls the enemy of the people, and there's certainly people who believe that. Trump himself, though, by his actions, shows you that he is not someone who really believes the mainstream media is the enemy of the people. We are his most important constituents, right? He spends more time watching us, reading us, than he does anything else, right? He's always at raw intel from Fox and Friends, and gives all the interviews to the New York Times. So he by his actions shows that he really, really cares about us and our opinions. So I am sort of worried about that. The Bezos thing, I am not worried about. We had this meeting with Bezos. Bezos is the world's, I think, second richest man now, who owns us. You never get that much of his time. We had a meeting with him with the national staff, and somebody asked him that, Trump has talked about, going after you as, blocking your mergers or something like that, are you worried that we will get you in trouble? And he basically said, no, I can handle myself, you do your jobs. And I'm glad he said that. I think it's the right sentiment, but I also believe it. I mean, I think Bezos holds a lot of cards there that Trump doesn't.
Okay, enough of me. Let's have some questions. There you go, right there, in the Syracuse orange. She's going to bring you a microphone.
Oh, my name's Rebecca Thornburg. I'm a broadcast journalism student. And I'm
Good job, Becca.
She's got a microphone for you right there.
Oh, no, you can keep going. It's fine. You sound great.
Just a question about the campaign in general. It's reported that there was over $5 billion of free coverage Trump got from the press, and Hillary Clinton was only about $3 billion. Do you believe the media really did have an effect on how Trump was elected?
Oh, yeah, I do. I think TV more than print, but yes. I mean, it's the way during the primaries, CNN and other channels showed Trump's empty podium when they waited for him to show up at his rallies, the way they covered all his rallies live. I think that Republican primary was won by Trump partly through all the free media. And I think they made him sort of the star and the agenda setter of the campaign. I mean, I can tell you that he would have lost the election without that coverage, but I think there was a tendency to treat him. I mean, like Saturday Night Live let him host the show. There was a tendency to treat him as like an entertainer or as a star instead of just a presidential candidate that brought a lot of money into a lot of a lot of TV networks, but was not really justified by any sort of like journalistic need, and it wasn't accompanied by journalism. There wasn't any effort to like to try to find out what he actually believed. There was some, but it was not equal to the sort of just giving him a platform to reach a bunch of people. So yeah, I think the media did play a role in elevating Trump and helping him win, certainly.
How many, you told me the last time he talked to you was when he called you
Nasty guy.
Nasty guy. So what efforts did you make to try to talk to him from that point on to the election?
A lot. I mean, every story we did, I would send his people, a long, detailed list of requests. Here's the data that I found about his charitable giving. If you think there's a problem here, point it out. Here are the questions I have. Trying to give them every possible avenue. And they often just didn't respond at all. One thing that was really interesting, at one point, I had written a story about something about Trump's charitable giving, and I asked them all these questions, and they didn't respond. And then they gave the answers that they should have given me to CNN. And so then CNN had me on, and they were like, it was sort of like a gotcha interview. They were like, David, we found some holes in your reporting. Look at the Trump campaign says this, this, and this. And I learned from that. Apparently that's something that Trump used to do with like the New York Post and Daily News. Like one of them asked him to do a story that he thought was critical. He would withhold information and then give it to the other one, so the other one could say, look at this one side of the report, they didn't even ask about this. So that's why I started posting my questions on Twitter. Like, look, when I asked the Trump people for comment, I didn't just ask, do you have any comment? I said, I give them all these ways to respond to the story. I think they never did it after that. But he never talked to me. Apparently, I learned later that Trump had a conversation with my editor at some point. Trump, a few weeks after I wrote the thing about the charitable, the gift to veterans, it really wasn't. He banned us from covering him. He wouldn't let the Post reporters who followed him into the media area at his rallies. And we were trying to figure out why. And my editor went up to talk to him. And the editor never told me this. I don't know why. Until much later. He said that Trump talked to him about me. It was like 20 minutes of him Trump complaining about me. And then he said, I used to think that guy was a nice guy, but he's a killer. So I said, bleep him. I'm never talking to him again. It's like, I wish I'd known that. I asked for comment like 400 times after he apparently had sworn off ever talking to me.
Well, you definitely look like a killer to me.
Yeah. And in Trump's world, that's like the highest compliment. I've taken that that's a good thing to know.
Right here in front. Young man, yeah. You. No, yeah. Yeah. I'll take it.
Retired professor at Upstate. How do you, this so... I'm wondering how you are viewing what I view as a threat to democracy from Facebook and other social media. I mean, the unedited, obviously, infiltrated media now is a danger. And how do you deal with that in the print media?
So basically, how you deal with the fake news that's being spread on social media.
Yeah, I don't think we understood it. I definitely didn't understand how bad it was during the election. And I think even now, what we're learning about the way the Russians targeted those ads, the money that they spent. I mean, there was fake news for profit. Some of those teenagers in Macedonia just made up stories about Pope endorses Hillary Clinton, worships Satan or whatever. But there was some that was planted by the Russians for the intent of undermining our democracy. And I think that we did not, as journalists, I don't think we understood the nature of that, even as it was happening. And Facebook particularly, but Twitter also, the business model they have is based on not them being a platform, but not being an editor, right? The reason they can make so much money is that we all provide all the content, and they just sort of sell it to, they sell it to us, but they don't edit it. And they have sort of always tried to take a position that they are not really responsible for it, right? They're not taking on a function of editing or vetting it. Of course they do, they edit out violent content and other sexually explicit things. So it's gonna be interesting for them. You're seeing Mark Zuckerberg, the guy who's the head of Facebook, he was doing this weird tour where he went around Iowa and other places earlier this year like a presidential candidate, trying to sort of sell himself to the public. I think they have to really understand the role they play in American society and the responsibility that comes with that. If they're gonna be the primary news source for all these people, I mean, set aside whatever the legal consequences are from what happened in 2016, I mean, there's a moral responsibility to make sure that you're not letting another country poison our democracy.
Well,
and I don't know, but to do that, really, how much work would it take? How much effort would they have to, how much would they have to cut into their business, to their very lucrative business model to make that happen?
And how much
Can
responsibility?
we force people to read the Washington Post?
I'm exploring that idea. I think we should.
Freedom of speech?
Yeah. Right.
But how much responsibility does the legitimate media have to spend a lot of time going on social media and saying this is true, this is true, this isn't true, this isn't true? Because that could take up all your time.
Yeah, and I am uncomfortable in that role, both because it lets somebody else set our agenda, and I feel like when we do that, often you end up spreading the fake news along, if you're this, you saw a lot of people doing that with Trump. Trump will say something that's totally wrong, and a lot of people will retweet it and be like, this is wrong, but then you're spreading the original falsehood, and I don't think that's a good idea to have us be the platform of spreading falsehoods, even in the context of debunking.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's hard to know what our role is, but I don't want to make us sort of the police, because we'll never be enough.
All the way in the, oh no, yeah, there's one back there, and all the way in the back. I didn't want to make you go up.
So the founder of Wikipedia just recently launched a website called Wiki Tribune. If you're familiar with it, and it's kind of model of using kind of citizen journalism mixed with standards-based journalism, what are your thoughts on it, and do you think it could kind of mitigate that some of that danger that the gentleman before me was speaking about?
The guy Craig Newmark, not Craig Newmark, Jimmy Wales, right? That's the guy who's head of Wikipedia. I mean, I wish him luck. I think that's a noble idea. To me, you always have to, it's a good thing to think about audience, right? You can't produce that sort of stuff without thinking about whether people want to read it. And I think there's something about, whatever, there's lots of great.
Hi, my name is Jishnu, and I'm a newspaper student here. A little while ago, you just mentioned your potential angle on if Hillary Clinton won the presidential election. I was just wondering what angles you might have gone into on the actual campaign, like what issues you might have looked into, what events might have occurred that made you look deeper in.
In terms of, that's a good question. I feel like we did a really good job writing about Hillary, and I'm glad that, and I didn't do that much of it. The people often wanted to compare the Trump Foundation and the Clinton Foundation, right? Both are legitimate things to write about, and they sound similar, but they're so different. The Trump Foundation was basically like a checkbook. It didn't have any employees, it didn't have any mission really, it just sort of serves to further the sort of social and business interests of Donald Trump. Its main cause was Trump himself. The Clinton Foundation has a lot of people, has a lot of money, it did good in the world, but it also, allowed Clinton to create these links with people who might want something from the US State Department. It's an important story, it's an important view into her character and the way that she and Bill Clinton saw themselves and whether they were sort of above the law and above norms. But it was just so different than the Trump Foundation, which is like breaking the most sort of penny ante rules, that I was glad I didn't have to cover both. We would occasionally write stories where me and another reporter would team up and sort of explain, here's the difference, but I didn't write that much about it, or really that much about Hillary. It's hard for me to say what I would do about Hillary just because I read that stuff, but I didn't write any of it, so I didn't really think about that.
So had she been elected, you would have been going into Health and Human Services and HUD and finding like raisins. But if they had said, no, you got to cover the Clinton administration, where would your focus have been?
I think it would have been really interesting to cover the bureaucracy, because there would have been so little done legislatively, right? Imagine a Clinton presidency with a very hostile Republican Congress. Nothing's going to happen in Congress. If things are going to happen, they're going to happen in the agencies. And I think that's, like, we had not spent that much time covering the agencies, and I think they're really interesting. They're interesting now, really, but they would have been interesting in that context too, as they tried to sort of like govern without a legislative branch.
So, one of the fears is that kind of the economic destruction of the journalism has been that not only state capitals, but the bureaucracy has gone uncovered. Whereas, Des Moines Register used to cover the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and you had people all over these agencies. Now, none of them are being covered.
Yeah, or they're being covered by, they often are covered by people like industry publications, so they're being written for a very narrow audience, often paywalled so that the public can read them. It's a huge loss. I mean, one of the things I really liked about covering the bureaucracy was that they have so much power, right? And there's such a huge, we cover Congress and the president and their intentions, and when they pass a law, what they intend for it to do. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen. The bureaucracy is what actually takes that intention and translates it into action. And it's so interesting. It's hard to cover in some ways because it's so obscure, but like the outcomes are interesting and the people are interesting. But we don't do enough of that. And I think that I'm hopeful. The Times actually has really kicked our butts on this. Eric Lipton and a few other people have done a lot of great stories about the EPA now, the FDA, the Department of Ag, the HUD, what's happening in those agencies as they're being sort of dismantled or changed by Trump's appointees. And we really haven't done that, and it's a loss because those things are so important. And if you work a little hard at them, they're interesting.
And so this is a possible way that Trump will make journalism great again, because the focus might be on some of the places that it always should have been on.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things that Trump has done for Washington journalism is that he is relatively powerless. He's somebody who talks a lot and does very little. And so he's devolved power to all these people that we weren't covering that much before. Agency heads, Ben Carson, Scott Pruitt at the EPA, but also people in Congress, like the people in Congress who had been sort of, because Republicans had not had enough power to really do anything, they'd been sort of cut off from the responsibility of governing, and now you're seeing, McCain, Murkowski, Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, Rob Portman, all these people in Congress emerge as like decision makers and interesting personalities in their own right, because they actually get to make the decision because Trump isn't doing it. Trump doesn't know enough to do it. So I think that's been a really good, cool thing, that we're now covering Washington's decision makers more than just the White House, which was never really where all the decisions are made. But now under Trump, it's much more obvious the decision making is among a bunch of other interesting people.
Oh, now we got some questions. Well, I already called on you once. I'll call on you.
I thought you meant him.
All right, you can go.
Hi, I'm Leonza. Good evening. Thank you so much for speaking. I wanted to ask, what would you say, and you can talk about this in a personal viewpoint, how has fake news changed the way you report stories?
I think about that a lot, and sort of the accusation of fake news has, I think about that a lot, and it's changed the way I think about my job in a couple of ways. One is that especially at the beginning of the Trump administration, there was this sense that sort of the Trump people were capable of anything, and a lot of people in the mainstream media ended up getting suckered into things that weren't true, just because it seemed like kind of all the rules were being broken, and everything was happening so fast. And I think people were tempted by the fact that the Trump people broke so many rules that we could break some of our rules. So you saw, it happens less and less, but there was a lot of people in the first days reporting things that turned out not to be true, or that turned out to be sort of partially true, just because it seemed like under Trump, we didn't know what was sort of within the bounds of the possible anymore. So we have to be sure that we don't report things that are wrong, and that we don't take Trump's chaos as an excuse to not check facts. So we can't actually report fake news. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I've tried to give people more of a view into how I do my job, you know, where I'm looking, how I'm checking, what the evidence I'm doing is, I'm finding is, so that when I put out the final product, you've seen it come together and you might have more trust in it. So there still are people, like we did the story on Monday about, yesterday about Trump's businesses losing customers. So like he's dependent on charities and sports teams and other people to rent ballrooms and golf courses and other things from him, and a lot of them aren't doing it anymore because they don't want to be associated with him. And so we wrote the story where we had all these examples and quoted everybody in the record, like nothing is secret, nothing is on background. All the people in the story quoted by name. You know, and we've been sort of reporting it out in the open, so if you've been paying attention, you could see us doing that. And some guy wrote me and was like, that's fake news! Like what? I don't even know what are you talking about? Like, do you have make up these charities? Like, I don't understand what the part is you think is fake. And so I want to give people more of a sense of that like, A, I'm open to every side of the story, and B, you've seen me report this, so you know what lengths I've gone to make sure it's right. That to me is the best thing we can do to try to combat fake news, is we show, it's interesting, first of all, people like seeing journalists sort of work. I think people like watching that kind of like the hunt for facts, but also it gives people confidence if they can see how you're doing it. That's the best I can think of.
Is there a fear, though, that you might be set up because this is such an unusual administration, that it's not just an adversarial situation, but that they would plan something or give you something to make you go, and then so you will report something wrong so they can jump in? And once David, if this is wrong, obviously all his reporting is wrong.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't deal with the actual Trump administration very much, but there were stories where they were bragging that they got reporters to write things that were wrong, and they were anonymously bragging. They got the reporters to write things that were wrong. I mean, the trouble with covering this White House is there's not a White House, right? Before, it was like the White House says X. There was an expectation that like everybody was on the same page, you know, for the most part. There was dissent in the White House, that was a big deal. But now you have 5 different factions, all of whom think that the way to get to Donald Trump's ear is to say it to the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or to CNN. And so like the White House, you know, White House official says X, that could be Steve Miller, it could be Steve Bannon pushing one agenda, or it could be Gary Cohn pushing some other agenda. So I think people have to be wary about that. To me personally, and I understand why these stories get written, but my policy has been just not to like retweet, talk about, publicize stories that are about what Trump is considering, right? Trump is considering doing this. He's considering, you know, everything from like, you know, mass deportation to legalizing the Dreamers. He's considering all these things because somebody, he may not even know about that, but somebody in the White House might say that to a reporter in the hopes that he will consider it. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that in the past stories about the White House is considering X, what that really meant was the White House is going to do X in a week, and it wants to put that out there now so that anybody has objections, they'll get them out in the open. It's a trial balloon. Mm-hmm. Now, the White House considering X means that like Trump may have seen it on television and then he forgot about it. Like, it's not an actual guide to what they're going to do. And it gets people spun up in all these different directions without any progress. So for me, I don't want to talk about, report on stories about what they're considering. I want to write about what they're going to do, you know, what they write down, what they put into action, which is a very small subset of the things that they're supposedly considering.
All right. How about one in the back there? Right there in the middle.
Behind you, behind you.
Oh, okay. Hi. Okay, so my question is, what is it like covering the White House and this president, and what do you think are the potential threats to freedom of press?
I think covering this White House in some ways is, I mean, I'm only basing this on my observations of other people at my newspaper covering the White House. I think it's hard in some ways, and if they lie to you, I mean, you know, they'll lie on the record, or they'll say things that are wrong on the record. How many times have we seen Sean Spicer or Sarah Huckabee Sanders say something definitive from the platform, from the podium, this is going to happen, the president thinks this, and the president themselves contradicts them the next day? It's hard that the official spokespeople are not reliable, and that before was sort of course, if they say it from the podium on the record, it's real. I think the reporters have benefited from, at least in the pre-John Kelly era and some now, the fact that these people are all leaking against each other. They see the news media as a way of getting to Trump. And so they're all talking. We used to have these stories that like 25 people in the West Wing had told us, had been sources for a story. Like, I didn't know there were 25 people in the West Wing. And so the leaks of that kind have been so voluminous, at least in the pre-John Kelly era, and continuing some now, that it's made it, I think you see much more transparently inside this White House. I mean, even the times when Trump has invited us, our reporters in, like there was like 3 healthcare bills ago, when the House was considering, when the healthcare bill failed for the first time in the House, Trump was on the phone, like trying to strong arm Republican House members to vote for whatever the current repeal bill was. And Bob Costa, one of our reporters, was in the White House talking to somebody else. And they were like, hey, come on in. So Trump has Costa sit on the White House, the Oval Office couch, and puts the congressman, Joe Barton from Texas, on the speakerphone. He's haranguing Joe Barton on the speakerphone to vote for this bill with Costa sitting right there, and the congressman doesn't know. How much more transparent can you get? And just because Trump thinks it's cool to show off how he's doing this. One thing Bob said actually in that situation that was really revealing was that, and I think this has been consistent with Trump in healthcare, the harangue was not like, okay, let's horse trade. You want this particular provision changed for doctors' reimbursement, but I want to take out this tax. Let's trade. Trading, like actually horse trading, knowing enough about the bill to horse trade. Trump was just like, it's going to be great, it's going to be awesome, I'm going to love it, it's a big victory for all of us. Like, that was as far into the details as he'd gotten. So you could really see how, like, maybe he was strong-arming wasn't going to be that effective. So it's a strange White House, and they are, on the one hand, so transparent, on the other hand, so hard to trust.
It would be great to get to Robert Caro, who did the Power Broker, but also did the 5 volumes on Lyndon Johnson, and have him compare and contrast Johnson versus Trump.
Totally.
Right?
Those are books everybody should read. All the Robert Caro books are amazing.
Yeah, so. How about right over here?
Okay, Michael, I'm a student here at newspaper. I was just kind of curious, the fact that you were the charitable reporter throughout the campaign, just knowing that there was not really any competition, did that do anything to kind of change your approach? I mean, was it a different space to be in for you at all?
It did. I mean, I wish there was more competition. Like presidential campaigns, I think work better when there's like there's sort of an echo chamber, right? If TD was interested, if the New York Times was interested, if we could get other people writing about it, I think it would dominate more of the cable news landscape. It would seem like a bigger deal. If it was just me, it was hard for that story to break through with so much else going on. It was weird. It was weird to not have any sort of real fear of competition. A couple of times I was afraid about, like, the HuffPo did something, BuzzFeed did a couple of things, but I was never that worried about it, and I wish I had been. And maybe they would have found something that I didn't find. It changed my approach in some ways, but the thing it would have done if it was sort of take off the time pressure, but because it was a presidential campaign, we knew everything had to be done by late October, so there was time pressure anyway. It was an unusual experience. I don't think I'll ever have that again, to be like that ahead alone on a story like that. But I don't know why people didn't pick it up. I really thought the Times would sort of jump into gear, and they never did. I don't know anybody there well enough to know why they didn't.
So let me ask you an inside baseball question. On the day the Pulitzers were announced, had you already known you won?
Yeah, I found out Friday. So they announced it on Monday. I found out on Friday.
So they leaked it to you ahead of time.
Yes, which is not always the case. That's like a big media advantage. The guys from Storm Lake, Iowa, who won the editorial cartoon, or editorial writing, they learned that day.
Yeah.
But
you never got noticed on that Toner Award, because that was the more prestigious one, and they kept that from you.
The Toner Award, I'll tell you 2 stories. Toner Award, I wrote a story about this. So Trump has a golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey. He goes to often. He has this weird thing where he's applied for like 3 different cemetery permits there, and he's told everybody in New Jersey he wants to be buried there, when no one really believes he wants to be buried in New Jersey. Anyway, I was like in New Jersey scoping out this land where Trump wants to be buried, supposedly, and like talking to I was like just got off the phone with the New Jersey Cemetery Commission, and when the Toner Award people call, I was like in a parking lot talking about cemeteries in New Jersey, and I was like, all right, my day off.
Very appropriate.
And so the Pulitzer Day was with my in-laws. I just happened to be in New York with my in-laws on that Friday. And they always call you. I've been through a lot of years where I didn't win. So that, like Eli, the illustrious alum, I don't remember the year he won. I knew they told you on Friday, like sometime in the afternoon, and then you're supposed to not tell anybody. But if you don't win, as I had not won for many years, you just sort of hang around until like 11 o'clock Friday night, and you're like,
Hoping that they change their mind.
They're like hoping there's a mistake, and then you drown your sorrows.
Yeah.
So I was with my in-laws, and my mother-in-law is a college admissions director. She worked in college admissions her whole career. And so I'm telling them, I'm like nervously sitting around in New York on this afternoon, and I was like, okay, well, this is the day they're going to call. If I won, they're going to call. If they don't win, they're not ever going to call, and I'm just going to agonize for the next like 8 hours. And my mother-in-law immediately started giving me like the thin envelope speech to people that she doesn't admit. And she was like, you know, it's not about you. It's just a standard process. It's not a judgment on you at all. And in the middle of that, they called me.
And then she gave you the thick envelope.
She was like, of course, it means everything. It shows what a great person you are. So, the last story about that, so my daughter is 5. She was in pre-K then, and she was in the picture. She was there for the actual formal announcement on Monday. She wore this sparkly dress and got this compliments from the fashion critic, but she was in all the pictures on the front of the paper, because I was like sort of standing next to her when they announced it. The next day in pre-K, it was show and tell day. You were supposed to bring something that starts with an N. So Alexander had the newspaper with her picture on the front. Some of the kid has like a nut. You know? It was a big day for her.
And they traded. Yeah. And the other kid probably got expelled because someone had an allergy, right?
Yeah. You can't bring nuts in elementary.
Yeah. All right, we still have time for a couple more questions. Right here, in the middle. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brooke. I'm a freshman newspaper and online journalism major. My question for you is, so with like the rise of fake news, or like the emphasis of it in the past like year or two, how are journalists and news sources kind of taking back that credibility that they used to have? And like, how do you see that in your own work?
To me, the thing that I think is different now is, I mean, the fake news allegations have changed things. Also, the sort of fast-paced news where people like get distracted every 5 seconds, so you can't like throw out a big story and expect like, oh, this is so big, it's going to dominate the news cycle. I don't have to do anything. Like there sort of was an attitude, I think, for a long time, especially in political campaigns, where like, I've got a big story, I'm going to throw it out there, and then I'm just going to sit back and watch the ripples go. And that's not the way you, like, so you have to keep people's attention. So both the fake news problem and the question of like, how do you keep people's attention, I think are kind of related, because if they're not really paying attention, it's easier to fool them. To me, I think part of our job has to be to give people a thread to follow. They always like, the story that I'm writing, I want to give you something every week, every day that helps you understand that even if I don't have a big story, to keep up with what I'm doing, right? So you remember, you have an attachment to my story, so you can't get fooled about it. And also, so you can sort of like get back to it in the middle of this whirlwind of news. Like I can get back to the story this story that I care about. Part of the job too has to be like building maps of things. Like Trump particularly, he keeps so much about his life secret, so much about his business, his government, his charity. Building is something that people can refer to. Like there's a secret world here, and I've mapped it, and I want you to see what I've mapped, so then you can look at it and draw your own conclusions, find something that I don't find. So that's what we're trying to do. A lot of things where, like I post a lot of lists on Twitter. Like here's a list of all the charities that are at Mar-a-Lago. Here's a list of all the charities that I've called to see if Trump gave them money, so that you can look at it yourself and like trust it, but also find your own use for it. Find an analysis of it that I haven't found. Involving people in stories that way, I think both helps them sort of keep up with the story, but also helps them trust the story more. So that's how I've tried to respond. I think people have, there's been other reactions from other people. The Times, I think, has done this really good thing called The Daily, this like podcast, where like, okay, now you're hearing somebody's voice talking about it. Like you're hearing about, it's not just a disembodied word on the page. You're hearing a guy that you know and like, and you're building that kind of rapport. So we stand out in the world of other outlets. Like if truly there are people out there who are interested in politics and don't know to trust the Washington Post over like Patriot News, 247.com, or some like thing that's like a fake news site. If they don't know the difference, like from their name, then we should give them something about us that you can see right away. Oh yeah, this is different. Like this is more trustworthy than that, and so people know to trust us. And that to me is how I'm doing it, to try to show people more of my work.
So there's this great scene in All the President's Men where Woodward and Bernstein are at the Library of Congress going through all the slips trying to find the book that Howard Hunt took out on Chappaquiddick. What you did with the charities is very similar to that. So first of all, did you ever look at that and say, man, this is daunting, I don't think I'll ever get through it? And B, did you ever spend a lot of time on a story that just didn't pan out in this area?
Yes, it was daunting, but I like that kind of stuff. I like, to me, like solving the little mysteries is fun, and like building a database is fun, almost to the point that like sometimes I don't want to stop doing that and just like collect what I have and write a story. I just find that part sort of satisfying. Like this thing we're doing that lately is like trying to find people who had events at Mar-a-Lago and then had left, try to analyze whether Mar-a-Lago was sort of doing better or worse since he became president, started running for president. Like the Palm Beach Daily News, the society newspaper, has an online calendar, every social event in Palm Beach going back to 2009. So we scraped it, made it into a database, and then I'm like analyzing all these trends, calling all these weird charities. I just like that because at the end I built something that didn't exist before. I understand a world that I didn't understand before. Talking about things that never panned out, there were a lot of them. Like I flew to Indiana a couple weeks before the election because there was supposedly a cop there who had seen Trump go into the women's locker room at the Miss USA pageant, whichever one he owned. It turned out his story was he didn't really remember. So I went to Nowheresville, Indiana, and came back with nothing. We spent a lot of time chasing the Celebrity Apprentice outtakes. There was supposedly this tape. Tom Arnold talked about it on Twitter. That supposedly people in Hollywood had seen where there was outtakes of Trump acting like a bore on the set of the Celebrity Apprentice. We spent a lot of time calling people who worked on that show to figure out whether they had ever seen it, or if they had it. I personally don't think the tape exists because everybody you talk to had sort of not ever seen it, and they had different versions of what it showed. That was obviously produced no results. There were a lot of things on Trump that, rumors we chased that didn't produce anything. It's part of the job.
Yep. And there in the corner.
I really enjoyed following your quest for the particular Trump portrait that someone on Twitter was able to sneak into a golf club and track down. What did you consider your greatest moment of Twitter leading you to something that you didn't think you could find?
That was a good one. So the brief version of that is we knew from reporting that Trump had used the money in his charity to buy a $10,000 portrait of himself. Or actually, he spent $10,000 on a portrait of himself. I can't say it was a $10,000 portrait. I've seen it. But we didn't know where it was, and it could have been anywhere around the world. It could have been buried in the backyard of Trump, of Mar-a-Lago. And a Twitter user found it on the wall at, first found a picture of it on the wall at Trump's golf course at Doral outside Miami, and then another Twitter follower went to Doral and took a picture of it. That was big. My favorite story like that is less consequential in some ways, but much more satisfying because the mystery it solved was much more frustrating. So we had gotten all these documents from the Trump Foundation, its records going back to its inception in 1987. And in 1989, so they listed all the gifts that the foundation had given over the years. In 1989, it listed a $7 grant to the Boy Scouts. Okay, it's just $7. The smallest gift ever in the history of the Trump Foundation. And Trump obviously won't talk to me about why he did that. The Boy Scouts wouldn't talk to me. It's 20-something years ago. I sort of felt like, okay, well, I've just lost. This is I'm sure there's a great story, but it has disappeared into the mist of history. I'll never know the answer. So, but I was like, well, okay, I'll just put this out on Twitter to amuse my followers. Look at this. There must be a great story here. I'll never know what it is. So people picked it up. I didn't say, help me find the answer to this. I was like, yeah, look at this. At 5:30, 6 o'clock, I went home. And then I'm headed home, and I'm watching the Twitter. It's
I hope you weren't driving when you were doing this.
I was Ubering. We had a death threat, so I had to take different routes home. So I was Ubering to get home. So I was watching this on my phone, and it was like watching in a spy movie. The scene where they're trying to track a hacker, and they're like, "Oh, he's in Budapest. No, he's in Shanghai, or whatever." So the people at first, the Twitter followers have a theory that this is popcorn. Okay, the Boy Scouts have always sold crappy, stale popcorn to guilt-ridden parents. And so people were like, well, I did it too when I was a Boy Scout. How much did a tin of popcorn cost in 1989? And so the crappy popcorn maker is all on Twitter. And so people are like, at trails in popcorn. It's just a funny metaphor. Like you get to the end of the trail. The at trails in popcorn. How much did a tin of popcorn cost in 1989? And they come back right away. $5. Okay, it wasn't $7. Okay, so that's wrong. So put that aside. And then somebody else finds like a digitized newspaper from the 80s. It was like the Binghamton paper or the Poughkeepsie paper or something. And they digitized not just the stories, but the ads too, so it's all searchable. I think Google has done that. And they found an ad in the bottom of that paper that said, sign your son up for the Boy Scouts this year. Registration is only $7 for the year. And so then the Boy Scouts confirmed that. That's what it cost everywhere, including New York City, to sign up for the Boy Scouts for the year was $7. So I don't know for sure, but that was the year that Donald Trump Jr. turned 11, the year he would have joined the Boy Scouts. To me, it was like I was so happy to solve that mystery, but also it shows you something about the way Trump had viewed his charity from the very beginning. Like 2 years into the existence of a charity, which was, this is not really for charity, it's just another pocket of my pants. And if I have to pay a charity.
A tax-free pocket.
Yeah, right, tax-free. If I have to pay a charity for anything, I'll use the money in my charity to do it. The idea that a charity is a separate entity with its own goals that has to serve the public and not you, totally foreign to him, even then, when he would spend, the trouble it would take to go get some $7 out of some other bank account to buy Don Jr. into the Boy Scouts is amazing. That was my greatest Twitter accomplishment, I thought.
Are you sure it wasn't Eric?
No, Eric was too young.
Okay.
Eric was a Cub Scout.
Okay. And that was $5.
I thought so, right.
Professor Davis. It's coming.
So I think you have this incredible sense of humor that I think is really important.
So one of the hosts was, her husband was the pitcher for the Orioles, and so she said my husband said he's been in locker rooms his whole life, he's never heard, Trump called this locker room talk. He said, he's never heard anybody talk like that. It was a totally fine interview, and then afterward, some guy in Milwaukee who had seen me on Fox News called the Post. Later on, he was drunk, and he slurred my name into the automated voicemail system, and it sent him to somebody else's. This guy named Des Beeler, who's in sports, it sent him to Des Beeler's voicemail, and he left a death threat for me on that guy's voicemail. And so then that Des in sports forwards that to HR. The HR called the FBI, the DC police, and got so that everybody took it seriously. I mean, I think it would have been easy to say, well, this is just some drunk in Milwaukee. But the FBI went and interviewed the guy, and the Post hired this person who was she was a former South African police commander, and she had done embassy security in Tanzania for the South African embassy. So she had seen some stuff, and she did a security. She took me and my wife and did a security walkthrough of our house, and I didn't really know what to expect, but it was serious. And she was like, me and my wife were standing in the front room of our house, and she looks out the curtains at the street, how far away the cars in the street are from here, and she's like, well, it's probably too far away for a car bomb, but they might catch a brake on us. So the car, pretty fluid. And she, we taught her to she said it's very rude to work, don't go to work at the same time every day, go in the back way sometimes. Something we didn't do, she wanted us to build a safe room in our house that would have food in it. We'd be barricaded in there long enough that we would need to eat snacks. So we didn't do that. But that was my one time. But I think other reporters, especially female reporters, got much more abuse than I did. But just because that threat was sort of so specific, it had the word, kill in the threat, and it went to HR first, it was taken very seriously. So I felt very well taken care of by them. I don't think the guy was a threat, but it did change my life for a month or so.
If I can just ask a follow-up, Joel?
So yesterday they arrested him. He was drunk when the FBI went to interview him, and they decided not to charge him. He seemed sorry.
So David, what is your take on this discussion about whether or not the president's words really are a physical threat to journalists, and he is encouraging physical attacks? And if you think what's your take on that?
I mean, I think they certainly, I don't know what they mean in his mind. I don't think he actually wants people to assault journalists. Like I said, journalists are his favorite people in the world. He doesn't care about anybody's opinion as much as he cares about journalists. But I think there are a lot of people out there who would take that as an excuse to attack journalists. And people in the journalism, in the pen of reporters at these rallies certainly have felt menaced by the people who were out there. I'm glad that it hasn't happened, the reporters haven't been attacked, but I don't think there's anything about this rhetoric that would stop somebody. I think there's a lot of rhetoric that would encourage people to think that was okay. It was worse during the campaign, but I think this potential still exists. Certainly, I mean, it's so irresponsible for somebody who's the head of the United States government, in a country where we have the First Amendment, where the press is an important part of how we function, and somebody who privately relies so much on the press for self-worth, information, everything, to encourage people to think of us as enemies of the people. I'm glad that there's been no tragic consequences of it yet, but I think that's luck rather than anything he's done.
We have time for one more question. Right there. Yep. Just shout it out.
Okay. So obviously we're all college, my name is Catherine, I'm a newspaper student. We're all college students. So what do you think the aftermath of a Trump presidency holds for journalism? Will he go back to entertainment, trumping around, with his fake charities and his beautiful wife? What will that mean for us?
It's a good question. I mean, it kind of depends on how he exits. I think what he always, my theory about what his preferred outcome of this election would have been for him to lose, and then to be the one that got away. To be able to spend 4 years saying, look at Hillary Clinton, she's terrible, you could have had me, I would have fixed all these problems, to continue to sort of promise to fix everything with the snap of his fingers without actually having the responsibility of having to do it. When he leaves, probably he will do that to whoever follows him, no matter, and there'll be people who will pay attention to him and believe that too. I don't know, I think that there aren't that many people who are like Trump, and I hope that the next president, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, is going to be somebody who restores a lot of the sort of norms of behavior that presidents have followed. But who knows? I think we're so far away from knowing who that's going to be. Is he going to leave and have it be Mike Pence? Is he going to be some Democrat who beats him in 2020? I just don't know. I mean, I think I hope that the political journalism, the people who are watching this from college or just getting into journalism have learned from our mistakes and don't and treat somebody like this. If there is another Trump, if Kid Rock runs for president in 2020, to not treat them as a celebrity, to treat them as a politician, try to make them have policies that make sense. And if they don't cover them as a celebrity, don't cover the sort of outrageousness of it all. I hope we learn that lesson, but who knows? The way we have covered the possible Kid Rock Senate candidates, he suggests we have not learned anything.
Can I just follow up really quickly? So obviously Trump has been basically the epicenter of media for the past 2.5 years. Can anyone who follows him continue to dominate reporting in the way that he has?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I mentioned, in jest, Kanye West, we have President Kanye West, we have President Kid Rock, maybe, but I don't think anybody's like him. I mean, he's been a salesman on television his whole life, and a showman on television. This is what he's always done. So I don't think there's anybody else out there who would be like that. And honestly, I think that people are not going to want that next time around. But, I think the next president will be somebody who runs on the fact that, you're not going to have to sit around and wonder what crazy things happening in Washington now. Let me take care of it. I'm going to run things, and you can go back to your life and not worry about me. I think that's going to be I'll restore the dignity of the country, and I'll let you go back to living your life. I think that'll be the message the next president has. I just don't think there'll be anybody like him. And I think by the time he's gone, we're going to be sick of him being like him.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a fantastic